Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Casting Seeds. I'm Savannah, your host, and I am joined today by a guest, a very special guest. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Liz.
And if you couldn't tell, she's the sweetest person ever just by her voice. Liz is going to be helping me start a new series today, starting with childbearing and birth. And this series is going to be really, really exciting because we're going to go into the depths of every single aspect of the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. And this is all in the future. This isn't with Liz today. I'm just getting you guys excited about future episodes. I'm going to have some doulas come on and midwives, and we're just going to be learning everything and anything that has to do with biblical pregnancy, biblical childbirth. And I'm so excited. And Liz specifically is on our show because she's a mother of two kids and she had natural childbirth through that. She's been married for almost 7 years to her amazing husband, Richard, who I love also. And they have their own individual ministry of mentoring couples. And Liz specifically collects birth stories, Christian birth stories to boot, which nobody does that, and I can't wait to hear all of these birth stories. And she helps women as her ministry. So that's why Liz is here today, and I'm so excited that she's on the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And before we get to know Liz a little bit, I just want to thank you guys so much too for going through our first series with us, which was biblical sex. And I definitely recommend listening to that series first before going into childbearing and birth. Unless you're already in this season, then jump on into this new season with us. But let's get started on this episode. I'm going to just ask Liz a little bit about herself, and then we're going to get into, for our agenda today, childbearing. Our next section is going to be the husband's role and emotions. After that, we'll be talking about the physical changes that happen through pregnancy and childbirth. And to finish off our episode, we're also going to be going into nutrition and health. So Liz, I would love to specifically ask you, what got you into natural childbirth? Do you disagree with non-natural childbirth? Why do you feel like it's important, for a woman's relationship with God? I would just love to hear more about you, which I know our listeners would too.
Okay. Well, I think the first exposure I had to natural childbirth came through my family. All of my cousins have had home births. Richard's mom had almost all of her kids. She has 6 kids, and they all were almost all at home.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's so uncommon to hear.
Mm-hmm. So the concept of natural childbirth was very comfortable for me. Sometimes people fear the unknown, and to me it wasn't unknown, so I had that going for me. But when we were just a few months married, I thought I might be pregnant. And so Richard immediately downloaded a birth story podcast. It was so funny. He came home from work. He's like, I've been listening to birth stories all day long. I'm like, what are you talking about?
That's so nice.
So he got me hooked, and I downloaded the Birth Hour, which I'm sure many people have heard of in the birth world. But so the Birth Hour, I just listened to so many birth stories, and I absorbed all this information, everything from, planned cesareans all the way to planned unassisted home births. And, it was just such a fountain of wisdom to be able to kind of gather mentally in my head, statistically, in my own little statistical logical brain, like, oh, in general, I'm noticing a trend here. Like birds that are generally messed with tend to go kind of awry. There tend to be more complications. There tend to be more dissatisfaction.
What do you mean by messed with?
So interventions. So everything from being induced to epidurals to even just things like breaking the water when a woman's in labor, unnecessary checks, checking her cervix to see where she is.
There's so many bad things.
Like all of the things, even honestly, just interventions right after a woman gives birth and she's trying to deliver her placenta, and so much can be harmed in the natural process that God created. And I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, because there are. And I think it's good that we have hospitals and we have medicine for medical emergencies. But my midwives told me something that was very helpful for me when I was planning my home birth. They said, birth is birth is a story that gradually unfolds. There's almost never a circumstance that's truly a, oh no, someone's going to die right now unless we do something,
I
right?
know. They always use that as like a pro advocate for abortion.
Yes, exactly.
Always. It's
Yeah.
so
Or like, quote unquote, all of the myriad of emergency C-sections, right? So, and yes, there are exceptions, but in general, I think that's what got me so interested in natural birth. Can bring it back to your question is just hearing all those stories and sadness and even trauma and dissatisfaction of women and babies.
emotionally and
Emotionally, physically, spiritually, pretty much every aspect of our beings, ourselves, just hurt and damaged through unnecessary medical interventions.
What would you say to women? Because I've actually met personally a lot of women who even actually now listen to this podcast, who wanted to do everything, quote unquote, crunchy is what they say. But I personally kind of hate that term because I feel like then it becomes more about like a fad.
Like a trendy thing.
Yeah. Rather than how God made our bodies. So for people who are like, oh my gosh, but the pain was so unbearable. Everything was just so intense. So of course I wanted to get like every single injection possible, like to help support me. What would you say to women who genuinely fear that coming into labor? But on top of that, in the middle of labor, we're like, no, there's no way I'm going to bear this, which normally I will say the only experiences before you answer, the only experiences I've ever heard that out of is in a hospital setting. But I would love to know your opinion on that as well, because I feel like some women could be listening to this and being like, well, I had a great hospital birth. What are they talking about?
Yeah. Many women do go into birth wanting a natural birth. And I remember after giving birth to my son in the hospital, he was totally intervention free. And the nurses were shocked. They were like, I can't believe you did this. You know how many women come in here wanting a natural birth with no interventions? And I can't believe that this actually happened. And so...
Did they offer interventions to you a lot?
I arrived at the hospital. I was determined to be there the least amount of time as possible because I know they knew they would offer lots of interventions. I specifically chose a hospital that I knew would be more respectful of natural birth and more supportive of that. So that was helpful, but I arrived at the hospital already transitioned. Like I had already transitioned at home in the shower and I was at a 10+1.
And that was your first birth.
And it was my first birth. Yeah. I just was determined to not be one of the first time moms who get there and they're dilated to like 3 or whatever, 4. And so I remember thinking at home in the shower, like, this is not going well. If I have hours ahead of me, I'm not handling this well. This is not good.
So what did you do?
So I don't know. I was just laboring in the shower and I felt Ridgely burrowing down in me. So anyway, we got to the hospital. I was a 10+1 and it still took, about an hour and a half or so to push him out. It was not fun.
Labor.
Yeah, it was hard work. Yes. Definitely hard work, but it never entered my brain to want an epidural. I think honestly I was more scared of the interventions and of the epidural than I trusted God. I trusted God's design.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, I can do this. So many women have gone before me and have done this.
Yeah.
And yes, there are rare exceptions, but usually I think just trusting yourself and trusting the process. But you asked about women who want to do it naturally and then they get in the middle of it and they're like, no way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
get me out of here.
I think being offered stuff that you didn't plan on, like interventions and stuff.
Sounds tempting.
By staff. Yeah, of course. And every woman almost every woman I've talked to who've gone through natural labor gets to a point in their birth where it's normal to feel like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Like women have said, I'm done now. And they're like, baby's still in there. They're like, I'm done. I'm going to.
Well, that's kind of like, in a workout where you don't want to push further and you're like,
yes,
you have 5 more reps, which is so lame in comparison.
I think the encouraging thing to remember for women who are hoping to have a natural birth, even a natural birth in a hospital, when you feel that like point of desperation or point of, I like to call it surrender. That is when it's like so close. You're just so close to the end. And
that's where you push further.
Yeah. Or even like, sometimes it's not like that always interventions are always evil. And like, I know a woman who refused to go to the hospital because she was so crunchy, so to speak. Her life was in danger and her baby's life. There was an actual complication and she was refusing to leave her house.
Wow.
She was so afraid to go to the hospital. And her mom was her midwife was like, no, you need to go. And she was like, I am not going there. And she almost died. So there are rare exceptions. You know what I mean? I hate fear mongering. I think there's way too much fear mongering in the birth world. But I'm just saying in general, like this one woman, this was one of the best birth stories I've heard. I love it. She was so tired. Her baby was in a wonky position and she wasn't progressing in her labor very well. So in the hospital, they call that failure to progress, right?
Yes.
So she was at home. And I think it had been over 24 hours or like 48 hours, something, a long time. She was really tired. And she's like, okay, I'm going to go to the hospital and I'm going to take myself to the hospital and I'm going to get an epidural to sleep. Oh. And then I'm going to go home and have my baby.
So she just went in and took a good nap?
Yes. So she like literally wrote down all the things she did not consent to. And she signed it and gave to the hospital staff. She's like, I am not here to have my baby. I'm here to sleep and rest so that I may go home and have my baby at home. And like she literally wrote, I do not consent.
She used the benefits though of the hospital.
Exactly. She used the medical help that was available to her. Right. She's like, I just need to because her contractions were so intense because her baby was in a wrong position that she just she couldn't sleep.
She needed to relax and allow her abdomen to relax.
Exactly. I just thought that was fantastic.
Can I just do that in general, like without being in labor? Just go and sleep with. Could you imagine? That's amazing. Well, No, yeah, thank you. Because I feel like women tuning in, because obviously we're going to talk about more naturopathic ways of childbirth, even in a hospital and outside of a hospital, but mostly God's agenda for us, right, as women, and his design for us and the purpose for us and how beautiful it is. And I mean, just so many women take advantage of that and use it to either fearmonger men into marriage or pressure basically the government also for more money and
totally.
And also insurance. Exactly. And I feel like women also use, and I'm saying this specifically for us as women, like we can be very manipulative, right? Yeah. But they also use children for their own benefit. And I think that's why also where people that are, pro-choice try to use those things to fearmonger again into why women should use birth control and women should use be able to have abortions and all those things. But we'll go into those more in more detail. But I'm really excited, you guys, for this episode because Liz has such sweet wisdom. And I always joke that whenever I've talked to her, because through my miscarriages, Liz has been there for me as a friend and even as like a mentor in that way because she's gone through healthy births. It's so funny because when I think about it, like she can so sweetly correct, but it's like you don't even realize like you just got corrected. And like I can't wait to go through this episode. And even in the same way, like if she's just giving advice, you're like, wow, I feel so dumb looking back that I didn't know that. And then she doesn't, like, she's like so nice about it. So I also too have some questions from people about birth in general or preparing for pregnancy that will be fun to go over. But just to get started in childbearing, I want to talk about childbearing and how understanding that it's God's gift to us as women. And just because it was used in Genesis 3, like when women were supposed to, we got the curse because of Eve and also Adam. I don't want to not throw him in there because there was a married couple that sinned together. When it comes to childbearing and labor, which I actually think, Liz, you explained this very beautifully, how people think that labor and the way that it was used and translated was actually incorrect. People think that it's supposed to be just 100% painful, the same way that for men, when they were cursed also with labor, their own type of labor, that it's supposed to be a curse. But there's a reason why men yearn for labor. They yearn for working for their families, the same way that women yearn for pregnancy. They yearn to do it, even though supposedly it's supposed to be painful. So I'd love for you to kind of divulge a little bit into that, because I feel like you have explained that to me beautifully in the past as well. So specifically in Genesis 3, New King James is what we're reading it out of translation-wise. Genesis 3:16, to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you.
Right. So that Hebrew word for pain is the same word for hard work or labor. That's why we call it labor.
So why was ours translated to pain? For the
I know,
men,
right?
it was just labor.
Yes. So that's how, honestly, when I think back to both of my natural births, that's how I would describe them, as hard work, like the hardest workout you've ever done. Was there some pain at some points? Yeah. But I wouldn't describe the entire process and it's a natural type of pain. It's not like oh no, someone's torturing me from the outside type of pain.
Well, I mean, and that I actually can resonate with that, even when for my first miscarriage, not knowing what it felt like to have that pushing feeling. When I went through that on my own in the bedroom, because Jeremiah was hosting Thanksgiving out here in our living room, which was crazy. But I'm actually really thankful I went through it alone, because like you mentioned earlier, it was the first time I ever had to truly submit my body ever.
Yeah.
Like feeling that I thought I was dying. I'm not even joking. I literally was like, I'm bleeding out. I'm dying in here. And because I didn't understand what that feeling was, that sensation, right? And it's not that it was necessarily painful. It was the emotional part that was painful.
Yes.
Knowing that my body was doing something that I literally couldn't control, but God was fully in control. And that, when you also mentioned the submission aspect, it was the most intimate moment I've ever had with the Lord. Like that full submission of like, oh my gosh, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay. But I can't believe like what's going on and what my body's naturally doing on its own. And when I tried to resist it, that's when it became physically painful rather than just emotional.
Yes, exactly. It's called the fear, pain, tension cycle.
Yes.
And I think that's why the enemy wants to surround the whole conversation of birth with the idea of pain. I mean, this is a God designed process. And even though it's now hard work because of the curse, we as Christians, we are called to redeem, right? The curse, to live, to walk in the Spirit, to walk in wisdom, and to, redeem those sinful aspects of our fallen world, right?
Yeah.
To some level in our lives. And so I think the more we give in to fear, the more pain we will feel. Actually, this is a proven thing. The more you fear, the more pain you will feel, and then you'll tense up, and then it just keeps going in a spiral.
And that's what I teach people literally every day in my office. Yeah. I always say like we're submitting into our pain, but the truth is it's more of the emotional fear of like, okay, I know when she touches this, it's going to hurt, but that's not true. When I touch it at first, it may be a little sore, or I may have a little bit of pain, but then you use that hard work, that labor process, right, through your movement to retrain your muscle memory. And then immediately people feel release. And I couldn't even imagine what that would, if I went through that at 7 weeks pregnant and it was intense. I'm so proud of you and all the other women who have given birth without any type of supplication, because a whole child, that submission.
It's a lot, for sure. Like that's the word I used after my first birth. Like I looked over to my husband after giving birth originally and I said, I would do that again.
That's crazy.
Women usually were like, never do this. You did this to me. Right. But I said, I would do that again. And that's the word I used. That was intense.
Well, the endorphin release though is so much more intense afterwards, which is why you're like, look at this beautiful, of course. Yeah. And also originally was the most beautiful, cutest little baby, and Elena as well. And so looking at 1 Timothy, which going into our first section, childbearing, obviously we just discussed how God has a plan and a purpose, even through the sin that was created in the world, which I wish more people discussed and encouraged, especially for Christians, because I feel like that's not spoken about, especially through all the women's ministries out there. But I know that there's also a lot of confusion around the 1 Timothy 2-15 verse, which this is the ESV version. It says, yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness and self-control, which I know I have a John Piper quote that kind of explains this. And then Liz, you have also a John MacArthur quote as well. So John Piper actually stole this from another guy named Harvey Alfred from 1871. So that's where he got this from, to give initial credit. But he says, what does through mean? Saved through childbearing? We aren't saved by means of childbearing, because we're only saved through Christ and Christ alone. But in 1 Corinthians 3:15, this is what Paul means when he says that they are saved through fire. The fire is threatening him, and he comes through it safely through submission, through the true submission through Christ. So it would be the same thing through childbearing as well. And the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of people in the New Age Christianity, which I don't even like to call it Christianity, to be honest, but the New Ageism that snuck into Christianity and with childbearing there, which is based on paganism.
Right.
A lot of women tend to think, well, I have worked so hard through this labor, through this process, and I just pushed a human out of me, especially women who do it naturally, right? I went through all of this, and then that's where the curse of, the seed comes in, where they start seeing themselves as stronger than their husbands, as better than their husbands. And then that also comes through in the way that they teach and train and lift up their children, that women are lifted up in a special and spectacular way, which makes them the head, which going into even witchcraft, they flip that, where women are the head. And that's why abortions are, used a lot in witchcraft. And people will listen to this and maybe roll their eyes, but I have tons of videos saved, which I don't want to put in my show notes because there's no need. And I don't want to improve the views on those videos. But those things pop up all the time because I follow tons of birthing stuff online. And women literally right now in witchcraft and New Age, not even just witchcraft, but New Age, kind of what the new millennialism, I guess that's happening, are using children as like a means of sacrifice. And they go and get abortions. And then the act of the abortion, they will use in like a magic way to promote themselves. And they
demonic way.
And they call it, like black magic or white magic. And they use it for a new birth in their life. So they sacrifice a baby for themselves to be reborn in different ways. And I know it's a disgusting and horrific topic, but that's why I'm bringing this up specifically for any Christian who has any temptation in that or confusion, which I don't know anyone who genuinely would, but if that is a temptation in your life, to understand God's purpose in childbearing and that it's a completely selfless act, the same way that the God's purpose in marriage and in sex, which we talked about in our first series, is selflessness, not selfishness. But I'd love to hear the John MacArthur quote on the same 1 Timothy 2:15 verse.
Yeah, I was never satisfied with my understanding of this passage, so I did more research for this episode, and John MacArthur's commentary was super succinct, and I thought it made perfect sense in the context.
Yeah.
So saved in this verse, the word saved is from the Greek word sozo, which is the common New Testament word for salvation. The word can also mean to rescue, to preserve safe and unharmed, to heal, to set free, or to deliver from.
Yeah, like break every chain.
So it appears a number of times in the New Testament without reference to spiritual salvation at all. So obviously we don't need to assume that in this passage.
Yeah.
But then Paul teaches here, John MacArthur says, Paul teaches that although a woman precipitated the fall, right? She was the one who initially was deceived. And women bear that responsibility, yet they may be preserved from that stigma through childbearing. The rescue, the delivery, the sozo, the freeing of women from the stigma of having led the race into sin happens when they bring up a righteous seed. So Paul's point is that while a woman may have led the race into sin, women have the privilege of leading the race out of sin into godliness. So, and then the pain associated with childbirth was the punishment for the woman's sin, Genesis 3:16. But the joy and privilege of childbearing delivers women from the stigma of that sin.
Yes.
Which is such a beautiful contrast.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. Thank you for bringing that. Because that's the other thing too. People, I think, associate pain as in like just something painful, but people don't realize sometimes when it comes to sin, like the antithesis of God giving us life forever, everlasting life through salvation is death, right?
Yeah.
So death and sin are equal. And the fact that women literally since the beginning of time risk their lives through childbearing and through labor, and the pain too also came through not even just death, because death is sin, but the sinful aspects of like now through childbearing, that's where, I've seen babies even come out with like limbs contorted or just painful birth defects. and things like that, which those are all considered not that it's a sin that a child has that, but anything that is outside of God's perfect design
It's the
is
result of our
sinful
fallen
world. Yes, exactly. So it's also understanding that aspect too, which I feel like John MacArthur brought in a lot better. And getting back to specifically like the New Ageism versus Christianity and the differences between the two, would you say, Liz, like for you, people who think that New Age ways of giving birth, that's, you know, a new thing, or actually better to remove God from it, what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times Christians don't even understand fully what New Ageism is and the sort of worldview behind that. So I wanted to provide, because it's so trendy now, everyone's into, you know, all the things, the crystals and the meditations. And and it's seeped its way into the church. So I just wanted to give a brief snapshot overview of New Age thinking, which is a form of the transcendental worldview. It's kind of a mouthful, transcendentalism.
Yeah, well, if for someone who's never heard that before.
Yeah, so transcendentalism arrived on the scene as a backlash against naturalism, which naturalism taught that all reality was only matter, right? Like only things that we could see and touch, very just science and fact-based. So naturalism claimed that there was no spiritual reality. But in contrast, transcendental expression, such as Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Scientology, New Age, they claim that the only spiritual is, so that only the spiritual is true reality, right?
Okay.
And that physical matter is only an illusion or non-existent altogether.
So it's a far extreme.
Oh, yeah.
They're both far extremes.
Yes, exactly. And as we know, biblically, usually truth lies somewhere in the middle, right?
Yes. Which is what Jesus teaches.
Exactly. We are physical matter, right? And we are spirit. So I wanted to quote from a wonderful book called Making Sense of Your World. It's written by expert worldview theologians. We can link it if you want to link this resource, but
we will.
It's a wonderful overview of each basic worldview, taking each through the same basic test of logic. So I appreciated that because I'm very logical.
She has it here, by the way, you guys. I love that she actually brought the book and didn't just quote it, because that makes my heart sore.
Yes. So I wanted to read about transcendental thought. So it says, quote, "Much transcendental thought is based on the fundamental idea that all things are a unified whole, a concept known as monism. Everything that exists comes from the same stuff. There is no essential difference between a rock, a tree, a cow, and a man. Two major characteristics of the transcendental God differ from the God of Christian theism. First, the transcendental God and the universe are inseparable."
What?
Yes. The second difference is that the transcendental God is not a personal being. So for the transcendentalists, God is the impersonal force, principle, or spirit behind the created world.
Yes.
Right? So there is no difference between this rock and God, between me and God. We are all God.
Yes.
Right? So that is the summary of, sorry, that was loud.
No, it's fine.
That's the summary of New Ageism. And I think a lot of people don't even understand what their sort of trendy little...
They bring that into Christianity so
the time.
much. And God literally says, I'm a jealous God.
Yes, exactly. So naturally, unbelievers who recognize a spiritual reality in the birth conversation, but they don't have a relationship with their creator, they have to attribute spiritual reality of even health, pregnancy, and birth to something, right? But in transcendental thought, it is claimed that each person is divine, right? Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was a major thinker in the transcendental sort of startup. He stated that the currents of the universal being, capital universal L and capital being, circulate through me. I am parts or parcel of God. So when you're pregnant or you're giving birth with the New Age thinking, you are God, bringing forth more godness of all the godness around, right?
That makes my stomach turn just hearing you say that.
Exactly. So there's a lot of New Age rhetoric in the birth world, especially when it comes to affirmations.
Oh, yes.
It's super common to see phrases all over Pinterest and Instagram, like, I am a radiant being filled with light and love. I have all that I need already within me, right?
Yes.
These types of statements point us toward seeking salvation in ourselves or complete completeness in ourselves.
They're like the live, laugh, love verses of transcendentalism.
Yes.
I can't even say, how do you say it again?
Transcendentalism. So to transcend, right? Above whatever physicalness is around us. Yeah. So these types of statements and ways of thinking, they don't point us toward a need for Christ and dependence on him. It's all about finding strength and
within yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that way of thinking. You can tell it's a passion of mine.
Yeah. Well, also it's just completely anti-biblical
Yes.
in every way, shape, or form. And just what we were talking about earlier about the true submission that you have to go through birth.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine someone with a true new age mind of thinking. You end up then having that fear underneath because then it relies on me, myself, and I having all the strength. And when everyone goes through that one moment you spoke about where it's like, I can't do this.
Yep.
Yeah, you can't.
You can't. That's right. And it's like, Satan is not creative, right? He's not, well, he is creative, but he's not an inventor, right? He twists whatever God has already made. So
the truth.
Yeah, it is important to preach truth to ourselves, right? And to renew our minds in the spirit. So I'm not saying any type of affirmation is bad or whatever. I actually listened to Christian hypnobirthing when I was pregnant with both of my babies, which I loved. And it was just prayers and scripture and things that were biblically true to repeat in your mind.
Being showered with the word.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wonderful. So yeah, I want to, differentiate there. So
yeah, no, thank you. Because I feel like people want to feel, which I know music and playlists are actually important and it does help because it also is like being bathed with the word if you do use worship through birth, which I know you did for both of your births. But when people put on, what's the nicest way to say this? I guess we don't have to be nice. This is for Christians. But when people tend to do like basically those beats, you know what I'm talking about, where people use certain beats or frequencies to help heal their bodies or even to help with birth. This isn't actually a weird thing, but it can be used as a weird spiritual thing where people will literally worship the frequency that's helping them feel better. And it is scientifically proven, which this is actually really cool, Liz. I've been excited to tell you this. It's scientifically proven that when people gave birth with dolphins, because they are amazing at getting frequencies in water, that they had 100% pain-free childbirth. And you know why? Because the dolphins can feel the frequency that the mother's back is at or the baby's at and calm down, like literally use its own frequency from its brain to calm down and match those frequencies and take you out of it. Isn't that insane?
Get me a dolphin.
I know. So they gave birth next to dolphins and then they recorded it. And
like in the water with the dolphin?
Yeah. Okay. Over 100 women.
That's great.
And every single woman from different backgrounds.
It does sound very woo-woo.
It does.
But that's true. We know about dolphins and frequencies and it's an actual thing.
Well, so people then took that, right? They tried to take it. It's different when you have literally, it's like a sound specialist with you in the water, changing with whatever you need. But people have taken that information and then used it to heal. Like even I've tried it before and it's worked for certain things, but they take that one sound wave. So like if the, let's say 180 frequency matches your colon and you're having a colon like flare up, then you turn it on and it actually calms down your colon because it's hearing a healthy version of that frequency and it does work. But
because God is the author of all of these things, right?
Yes.
And then we can twist those truths that God has given us, those truths, the actual aspects of his creation, and we worship the creation
over creator.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the thing, like there are things, and I feel like because as Christians, we haven't been truly taught like all the beautiful mysteries of God's creation, or been taught, I should say, to be excited about finding those things.
We've been taught to fear them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
like even herbs and
which is literally the base of this whole podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's funny because people take that, and because other people have found that truth, because it is truth, right? But then they manipulate the truth and then worship it, or then give glory to another God through that, or to themselves,
right?
Lowercase God, of course. But I wanted to bring that up because there are amazing, and I don't want people to feel like they can't do sound baths, or, even I don't see how crystals could help anybody personally, but I
Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? I'm probably wrong.
Yeah.
But I do know that people are made beautifully and individually. And just the same way that Liz, you and I are both very musically inclined. So music does help us a lot, where someone else could come in. I actually have another, you know her, my friend Terry Ann. She can't stand music.
That's funny.
Which I think is so
She was in
silly.
labor. She'd be like, turn off that racket.
Yes, exactly. And it would make her tense up instead.
Yeah.
Right. So because we're all made beautifully and individually, I do think that certain things could like connect better with us. And like for me, I do love rocks. I don't know if holding one would change my frequency or whatever, but I would never give the glory to the rock. I would give it to God for creating something that helped me.
Yes.
But that's why I wanted to.
God is a personal God, right? So he is going to minister to us in specific ways that are personal to us. I can't tell you how many times I'm going through something and like a specific song pops up and I'm like, I see you, God. Thank you. You know? And so, it makes sense that we can use these different aspects of his creation to meet our individual needs.
Right. So. The same way that every diet is different too. And everyone's genealogical background is different as well.
So I also wanted to contrast because you asked me about unsaved, new age pregnancy and birth versus a Christian biblical perspective. And so it's obviously Christians understand that God is the author of life within you, right? Psalm 139, 13 through 16 says, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they were written, all the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them." And as a side note, I think you were the one who said that there's actual light when sperm meets egg, right? I think you told me that. Yeah. And I just thought of this verse when I was thinking of that, how John 1, 3 and 4 says, "All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men." So I love how he's described as the light of men. And when he creates life, there is actual light that we can see.
Even when God spoke everything into existence,
exactly.
He said, "Let there be light."
Yes. And I knew that, but I didn't know how there's actual light every single time God creates a new life within us, which is important for the whole where does life begin argument, right? But yeah. So as Christian women experiencing pregnancy and birth, we get to surrender our bodies and our emotions and our spirits to God in a way that is really uniquely feminine to us, which is, men and women together, we both together reflect the nature and character of God. So this is just a fun way we get to do that. But I don't know one Christian woman who has given birth naturally who has not cried out to God for strength, like I said before. Right. And the verse that specifically ministered to me through my pregnancies, both my pregnancies and births, was Isaiah 40:11, which says, "He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arm and carry them in his bosom and gently lead those who are with young." And while I understand the direct context is him speaking of the nation of Israel and caring for them, but it also describes the nature of God and his heart towards babies and moms.
Absolutely.
And if we allow him, he will gently lead us through our pregnancies and through birth, because there's so many decisions to make and things to learn and just so much information to take in.
He wants to be the head of our lives, and giving him that headship, he will honor you through that as well.
Yeah. And he wants us to take ownership of our health and our, obviously depend on him, pray to him, ask him for wisdom, but then don't just trust whatever medical system you're submitting yourselves to. But really, truly, even my midwives, I had to really take ownership of my pregnancy with Elena, because I was about to risk out of my home birth. And because I had gestational diabetes and my numbers were getting hard to control towards the end of my pregnancy, and Richard and I prayed about it. The midwives kind of gave us a deadline, like, hey, you have 2 weeks or a week to figure this out. And if your numbers are not down, your fasting number in the morning, if it's not down to this level, then we can't do a home birth with you. And it was in the middle of COVID madness. I'm not about to go into a hospital willingly in the middle of COVID just because of something that I know my midwives are liably accountable to California. If they disobeyed that, they could lose their license.
Wow.
So I had to pray about it with Richard. Be like, hey, we sought outside wisdom. My aunt's a naturopathic doctor. She's worked with tons of births. And so So she helped us understand that the numbers were not ideal, but they weren't unsafe and medically irresponsible. So anyway, it was just really interesting. We kind of gave them the numbers they wanted to see for about a week, and then we figured it out, and the numbers came down, and we had our own birth.
Wow.
But that's just kind of an example of truly it's your responsibility at the end of the day, like you as a couple, you as a mom, before the Lord, to go to him for wisdom and to go to other people that you know have wisdom in this area, and really, lean into his spirit guiding you.
Yeah. I mean, that's really cool that he also sat down and prayed with you as well to figure out how to do it. What would you say to a woman who feels a little bit alone in her pregnancy? I know that's blending into the next section a little bit. I am going to read some stats, and I know you have some more on that topic, but for a woman who feels like, like for you obviously had to change diet and do things like that, and she doesn't feel as supported. What did you feel like Richard did that week to support you?
I think something that he said really stood out to me. My aunt's a naturopathic doctor. She lives in Arizona, and he's like, honey, if we have to drive to Arizona and like rent an Airbnb and, just give birth there, I will do that. And
good on you, Richard.
I was so relieved. He was like, yeah, we're not going to just go into this setting that is set up not in your favor, into a hospital, and kind of willingly go through that if we know there's, wait till there's actually something wrong in the birth, right?
And then go through that.
Yeah. Or I was actually even considering, it's technically called unassisted home birth when you don't have a professional there. And the acupuncturist I was seeing at the time, she's like, oh yeah, I did 2 unassisted home births with my kids, and I studied like all the midwifery information. So I'll be there for you if you want to. It was just such an answer to prayer, like such peace of mind, knowing that if we really have to not have my midwives there, I have someone there who knows, what they're doing enough so that we could know if we needed to transfer to a hospital.
Yeah. So. Well, I actually have a friend right now who's doing no ultrasounds through her pregnancy.
Yeah.
And I know this sounds so silly because of the career that I'm in, and I've been on birth teams before, but I've literally never heard of that before.
Oh yeah.
Like
I have.
Not doing any ultrasounds, doing unassisted home births on your own. And I was baffled that hadn't even been a thought in my brain. And I was like, of course, because that's what we've been doing.
Because we're so programmed to think that birth is a problem, like pregnancy and birth is not a natural thing. It's something that needs to be micromanaged.
Yes,
yeah,
that's so true. And because of that, and that goes with the fear mongering, right?
Yep.
Of like, you can't do this on your own. You have to have a team or people to support you. You naturally cannot figure it out if an emergency happened. And yeah, I totally agree with that. I also wanted to read you some stats specifically on those things, by the way, which I do find it odd that the CDC, so I'm reading CDC stats, which whoever trusts that, you. But I also wanted to make it clear that in these stats, specifically, all pregnancy and prenatal stats, all of them, are only taken from the CDC, which is weird, by Latino and Hispanic women. You know why? They have the highest birth rate out of anyone in the world.
Wow.
Yes. So they specifically left out everyone else, but then they say that this is just, a random study. But the caveats at the bottom, from Hispanic women only. So that's fun. We have all these links at the bottom in the show notes as well. But they're saying in the CDC right now that, because you and I both know, Liz, that birth rates, which also goes within the fear mongering, that because there's a bunch of infant fertility rates that are high and through miscarriages and things like that, that basically like, oh, no, like everything's fine. Our birth rates are super high. And this is only for Hispanic women, and specifically women who have come across the border illegally as well, because then they get paid for these. So here's some fun facts. Women are I'll just say it, Hispanic women are 74% in the US more likely to tear in the hospital. And this is like their healthiest births, okay? 38% more likely to change the birth plan while in the hospital. And if their plan is to not use drugs, they're 200% more likely to use drugs in the hospital. And 800% more likely to have dangerously high cortisol levels, which are
of course.
stress,
Yeah.
from versus a home birth.
Yeah.
And this is the CDC saying this, okay? But only with Hispanics.
That's fine.
I just feel like I have to keep making that caveat. You're also 30% more likely to be given iron supplements throughout the birth process, where they'll put it through your drip.
That was one thing I said when I arrived at the hospital. They're like trying to do the hep block on me. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Well, because you also
you can do that in a rush if you need to. That's kind of what you do all day long.
Well, because they say it's just for fluids, but what is the fluid made out of too? Like where is that salt coming from even? Like, because if it's iodine salt, that's also not great for you and the baby.
Yep.
And then the last thing I wanted to mention was, also for emergencies as well, like whoever you cater your birth team to, there are hospitals that are much more like willing to go with that and just kind of take a step back. But one, they're very rare to find, and two, whoever the head doctor is and nurse put on to their specific patient. So like if it's you coming in, it says only 90% of the head nurses and doctors are likely to say no to your birth team and say like, if I'm taking you on as a patient, you are now my patient and I get the final say. So not even the mom, the dad, or the birth team that you originally had planned.
This is what I tell expecting moms all the time. Like, your birth, your pregnancy is your responsibility. And when you place yourself under a care team where you fundamentally have different views of birth and how it should be run, that's on you.
True.
It's so on you. And it breaks my heart because women they're so sad, like they have horrible experiences. And they're like, I wanted this. And I'm like, but you did this. Why did you do that?
Well, it also too, I think the same way that in healthcare in general, people don't want to have accountability for their own health. And I see it all the time in my office. I have to teach body awareness and go through lifestyle and be like, yeah, basically every single thing you mentioned, even that severe accident you went through wouldn't have happened if you actually prepared your body properly.
Yes. And I hear a lot of women say, well, I just wanted to be in the hospital for my first birth just in case. Just because it's their first birth and we don't know what's going to happen. And again, the whole fear mongering thing, right? And I feel like they also want to be there to get an epidural just in case they can't handle it. And again, like we talked about, that's a normal thing to feel in birth. And as Christian women, that's what we're called to is surrender, right? Like that's the word I keep hearing over and over in the natural birth world. It's that we get to surrender, right? You must surrender to the process, surrender to the hormonal surges and not fight it. Surrender to your whole body opening, that's a crazy thought, and surrender to the ring of fire and going through that willingly. And that's what we're called to as Christians, is to surrender to God through trial, through fire, to surrender our own selfish and prideful demands to his ultimate wisdom and love for our lives. And that takes that takes faith, and it's scary. It's the unknown. Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding too. Does this not sound familiar, ladies? We're also supposed to be submissive.
Yeah.
That's what surrendering is. It's submissive. It's the one word that, especially I should say, what is it? The ladies who are super feminists use like, oh, I'm not going to be submissive to anyone.
Right. But that is true empowerment, is to humble yourselves under Christ and let his power work in and through you. That's like, if you want to be a feminist, great. Like, be a biblical feminist.
Well, that's the thing. Like the same way that people think that Christianity has a bunch of rules and regulations that chain them down. It's the opposite. God created creation a certain way. And when you see how you can live within that creation purposefully and how he was supposed to use us, it's like using a tool properly.
Yeah.
You are a tool and you get to be used properly. And then all of a sudden it's like all these doors open. We were like, well, my body feels so much better.
It's
that
amazing.
Birth was so
it's
easy.
Almost like God,
has a purpose.
Yeah, it designs us. And I tell this to my kids all the time. Like, God made us to love one another and serve one another. And when we don't do those things and we're sinning, we're just not going to feel that great, you know?
Yeah.
It's not going to be good for us.
Yeah, because you have that guilt that weighs on you, which is healthy, which I talk about a lot in this podcast. Like, it's okay and healthy to have guilt and conviction.
Yeah.
That means the Holy Spirit's speaking to you.
Yes.
And if you feel guilty or have conviction after things that you've done or said, that's when you repent. And then you can start over from that.
Right. And I want to be compassionate too. I know a lot of women have lifelong regret over the decisions they made through their births. And those birth experience and those stories, they're with you till the day you die. And if you have regret, that can be now a really wonderful tool that you can use to minister to others. And I'd say I had a pretty positive hospital birth with Ridgely, but there was enough that went down where now I get to use that and encourage them and be like, hey, don't place yourself in that situation. You know, it's not necessary, and you can use it to hopefully, spare someone else those things. So
and that's the other thing too. I know a lot of women are pushed into, like, I've been told that because I've had 4 miscarriages that I could no longer have a natural home birth. Like, a lot of midwives and doulas would turn me down. And I want to let you ladies know that that's not true.
Yeah.
There are a lot of midwives and doulas that will still work with you and be on your healthcare team to support you. Even if it is at a hospital, they will still be there to be your advocate and support you, and even friends or whoever you decide to have on your team. But for me personally, when I heard that for the first time, that definitely, again, that fear mongering, that sunk into my stomach of like, wow. So because my body wasn't working properly at that time, because I didn't prepare my body purposefully. And I even had that like regret of like, wow, from all the knowledge that I didn't know. And I'm the one who hurt my babies. I'm the one that allowed them to die. Right. By not being prepared. And that's also not true.
Yeah.
To all you ladies out there, I had to process that and go through that, I think, by like my 3rd miscarriage. So the 4th one, that was like,
because that wasn't your purposeful intent.
No.
That, again, sinful world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just what happens, and it's a part of it. But that's what's amazing. Even through miscarriages, you can learn through each experience. Through every birth, you can learn. And also, just like what Liz and I are doing here, we get to learn from each other as friends.
Yes.
And that's also the huge point of community and God's purpose in that as well. But let's head into the second topic, because speaking of community, our husbands have a huge role in that. And some people may be listening to this and be like, well, yeah, my boyfriend does. Or, I actually am doing this on my own and got sperm donation or whatever it is. Liz and I'll speak on my behalf. I'm not going to assume for you, but I'm going to assume that we're kind of similar because I feel like we've spoken about this before. But Liz, you can correct me at any time.
Okay. Disclaimer.
Yeah, disclaimer. Liz may not agree with me 100%. Liz and I are very huge advocates. And when I say Liz and I mean me, for a husband and wife role, doing things naturally through God's purpose and plan. Me specifically, I should say, I do think it's better. And the stats even show, which will be in the show notes, that a child's life is more beneficial through their own biological parent, staying with their parents, and then also husbands being like the biological dad as well. We understand that things go out of that situation and people are called to other lifestyles and things like that. And there's individual discernment in these things. But for what's best for the child, a husband or a father being the same bio-identical as the child is a huge benefit for you as the wife and for the child. So yeah, Liz, you can tell me if you disagree.
Yes. In general, I think there's obviously adoption is a different conversation.
Yes. But this is specifically under birth and stuff. So.
Yeah. Under are you talking about IVF and?
Well, IVF's a little different because people can also adopt other eggs or embryos that have happened as well. That tends to not be as common as people think. A lot of people think like, oh, well, there's tons of women who can't have kids. A lot of women who can't have kids continue to do their own eggs through IVF. Most of them do. It's not as common for a husband and wife who do have sperm and egg it's not as common for them to adopt sperm or adopt, I should say embryos, because some people do sperm as well. But what's hard too is it's not actually an adoption process as well. It's more, to me personally, it feels more like a human slave trade because you are literally buying unborn children off of people and people are selling those to you,
Yeah.
which I find really strange. It'd be different if someone was like, oh, I had 5 embryos and we only used 1 and we can't afford the rest. I would love to give people, even that sounds strange to me and playing God, but that is my personal opinion.
Yeah, I do agree that the closer we tend to stick to God's original intent, and this goes with birth too, right? That's generally where we see the most fruitfulness.
And the biggest benefit for especially the children who don't have a choice.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly.
But for the husbands and wives who want to be able to support each other and love on each other, I would love to hear what you experienced through the emotional journey of pregnancy, including the excitement, anticipation, and even maybe a little bit of the fear that you worried with, whether it's through one of your pregnancies or both. And also the potential challenges or anxiety and mood swings, whether it's again through that pregnancy or through the labor process, because they're both 2 very different things. And then on top of that, to boot, how you feel like Richard handled that process, what he did great, if there are things that Richard, if you're comfortable with her sharing things you didn't do so great, because I can even share things that Jeremiah did beautifully through my pregnancies as well.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember anything that I was like, Richard.
How dare you?
Yeah. He was a great supportive husband through both pregnancies. So I think one of the best things that Richard did for me was just really practically supported me in what I needed to do to take care of my body and my baby in the pregnancy. Because I had gestational diabetes, I had a very, very strict diet. I mean, I couldn't even eat sweet potatoes. And I had to walk every night after dinner, like vigorous walking for 30 minutes. That cuts into our evening time, together. I think the biggest thing was I highly recommend to any pregnant woman. I tell everyone about this is, he helped me with the 3 sisters exercises towards the last end of basically the last trimester. So we did this every night that we could. And
for people who don't know, what are the 3 sisters?
3 sisters is there are 3 different exercises that were you can find them on Spinning Babies, their website, which is all about basically positioning baby ideally, optimally in the womb for a smoother labor. So the more space and room you can create in your womb, the better. So Richard really helped me. You need a partner because you're so pregnant, you just can't even move around. And he would help me. One of the things he did was belly sifting. So you get a big rebozo or like a big scarf and you wrap it around your belly and your husband stands over you and it sort of sifts, like goes up and down with his hands. It's a good arm workout for him. But basically to just loosen baby, help baby move around, create more space in your hips and your pelvis and a couple of other things. But that took a good 30 minutes every night to do that together.
Wow.
And it was a great time. Also, it did feel like kind of a big commitment to do it every night, but it kind of was a great little connection point for us to connect about the pregnancy, connect with the baby
and
together to check in because you're so busy and you have so many appointments at the end of pregnancy and you're just kind of busily prepping your house that you can kind of lose sight of connecting with each other.
Was that harder when you already had Ridgely?
Oh yeah. Yeah. My second pregnancy went so much faster because I was running around. I was, caring for a very young toddler. So he was 18 months old when Elena was born. So
So did you guys have to plan, you feel like, more specifically then for that time near the end of your pregnancy?
Yeah.
Or did it just come more naturally because you already did it through your first pregnancy?
We already did it through my first. So we were expecting it with the second, but that's a big deal. I feel like for him as the guy to be like, yeah, I'm there for you, babe. I'm going to help you with that and do that with you.
Did he like it? Did he enjoy it?
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah. He knew, I think because oftentimes guys, they really want to help. They want to okay, give me a problem to fix and I'm going to fix it. Yeah. A task. And so much of the pregnancy and even birth process is, the guys can feel a little bit removed from it. We're like, well, I'm not doing anything. Right. But, this was literally something that I needed him for. And he helped me with that every single night. And also just financially providing for me to have chiropractor appointments and
Yeah.
things like that are so important. Every midwife you talk to is going to be like chiropractor, right?
It's true.
So, just being okay with, okay, we will financially budget for this. And that meant a lot to me that he cared about my comfort, because they really it helps my just bones and aches and pains, but also just through the smoothness of labor also, that he really wanted to set me up well for.
Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to part 1 of the Birthing and Bearing series with my lovely guest, Liz Wickham. If you guys loved the series, and especially these questions as much as I did, you guys are going to love part 2. We get even more in depth with the word. We talk about husbands and their roles in the birthing process, especially the biblical birthing process. And I just can't wait for you guys to hear all of the wisdom that Liz has to share. I'm so blessed to be the host of your podcast, and I can't wait to hear back from what you guys think. Keep casting seeds. We hope you enjoyed learning how to cultivate God's creation from a biblical perspective. Holistic health is to prioritize whole person wellness through Christ. Like and comment on what topics we're casting seeds or casting pearls.
If you found this information provided useful, subscribe to our podcast for future updates, leave a review to help us improve, and share this episode. We would like to remind you before we leave that perfect health cannot be attained in this world.
Only spiritual salvation through sanctification and repentance to God and turning away from sin will give you a perfect body in the kingdom come. Nourish yourself in the Word, in prayer, and in biblical fellowship daily.
Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to our listeners for making this podcast possible.
Always praying.
Keep casting seeds.